themartialman.com.
You mentioned previously about developing a roadmap. Would you mind sharing more about how you use it and exactly what it's for?
As mentioned earlier, learning Nei Gong, or in this case Yan Shou Gong, is like starting on a journey. And to start any journey, you need a roadmap, right? At least, firstly, to let you know where the destination is, right? And which direction is the destination. So, is it north or south, you see? So, first thing is it tells you the direction. Secondly, it allows you to plan your routes, because there can be several routes to the destination. Some are shorter but more difficult, some are longer but easier, right? So that allows you to choose the route that is suitable to you. Thirdly, the roadmap will help you to locate where you are, right? It helps you to define milestones. So by looking at the milestones, you know how far you've gone, how far you've yet to go. And also on the roadmap will be landmarks, right? So the landmarks will be points along your journey that can guide you, see? To tell you, oh, turn left at this junction, turn right at this junction, and so on, right? So we will talk a bit more about each one of these, but these are the essential points on the roadmap. So without this roadmap, it'll be very hard, number one, to plan your journey, right? Because you'll just be going in blind, and then trying things by trial and error. And if you do that, quickly you end up in a place where you don't know where you are, right? We call that place the swamp, where you get lost. So that's one, is to help you to plan. And secondly is when you're on the journey itself, the map will tell you where you are, how far you've gone, you see. It gives you a location. And again, without this location, it may affect your motivation, because you say, oh, I've traveled so far now, I'm nowhere near my destination. But if you know where your destination is, how much further you have to go, that will give you the motivation and the drive to continue. So I think that part of it is important. And also, of course, you have the intermediate landmarks or destinations could go along the way, you see. So each one could be a reward in itself, right? So that's why the roadmap is important, okay? I think, having said that, it's quite obvious. You need a roadmap when you embark on a journey. Okay. Now we'll go on to talking about the roadmap itself, right? Now, okay, this roadmap is not something I came up with out of the blue, okay? I like to emphasize that this is actually the knowledge that is embedded within the arts itself, okay? In the old days, the masters, the ancient masters who developed, the Nei Gong, they may not be literate, okay? So instead of writing a book about their knowledge and using this book as a means to transfer knowledge down to their descendants, they have written this knowledge into the practice of the art itself. That means into the forms, and the movements of the art and the process of teaching of the art, you see. So all this knowledge is actually, what I like to say, is embedded into the traditional art forms itself. So the form itself is the book in which that knowledge is written. Now, of course, this knowledge is not explicit, right? It's not clear. And one has to be a practitioner for many years and a teacher as well, because when teaching, you are faced with different questions and, you address different issues like how do you make the learning process easier for your students, right? So out of the 10 years or maybe more, more than 10 years of teaching of these internal arts and the other 30 years before that where I've been a practitioner, I have been able to decipher the knowledge that has been embedded in the traditional forms, you see. So this is where people question, say, oh, you traditional arts, why do you need forms? The forms are useless, they tie you into a fixed pattern. And there is where they are so sorely mistaken, because it is in the forms where the knowledge of the arts are embedded, right? And if you throw away the forms, it's like you try to learn a language by throwing away all the books. You say, oh, I don't need books to learn a language. And that is totally ridiculous, you see. So the form is your books, your textbooks for that knowledge. So the roadmap actually came out of my experience of learning and teaching the art, Okay, that's how the roadmap came about, and I like to pay my tribute to the art itself for teaching me and giving me this knowledge. Then let's start on the roadmap itself. To me, the roadmap has 5 parts. The first part is I call a learning triangle. This formulates the parts that will make up the total system, right? So without these 3 parts in the learning triangle, you don't really have a system for your internal arts. Okay, I'll elaborate more on that. So the learning triangle defines what the system should be. The second part is what I call the power plant model. Okay, so this is a model that serves as a layout or foundation of how you can structure the different parts of your learning. Okay, again, I'll elaborate more on this later. The third part is the 5 stages of learning internals. Okay, and these actually specify the 5 stages that make the methodology of how you can approach the learning process. So you can say the first 3 parts are generic. Okay, that means that they should apply to any type of Nei Gong practice or even Qi Gong practice. You know, if they don't have any one of these components, then definitely something is missing. Okay, so the first 3 parts that I just mentioned are generic. Now, the fourth part is what we call our Southern Shaolin 6 levels of internal energy. So this actually explains the difference between Qing, between Yi, within Qi, which is commonly lumped together. And from what I know, there are very few explanations out there, right, or very few people out there who can give a clear definition between the different things. So here we not only have a clear definition of the different types of internal energy, we also specify under these 6 stages of internal energy how the 6 stages are interrelated and how each one is dependent on the other. All right. Now, then the last part is what we call the milestones. So these are actually skills or capabilities or abilities that you achieve as you progress along your journey. And these skills, the achievement of these skills would allow you to define how far you've gone along the path. Okay. So again, I will describe this, but I may not give all the milestones because at a certain point, you need a certain knowledge to be able to understand it. But at least I give the first few milestones. So these are the 5 points. So just to recap, the learning triangle, the power plant model, the 5 stages of learning internals, then the 6 stages of internal energy, 6 levels of internal energy, and the milestones that you achieve from learning internals. Okay, so these are the 5 things. And I'll now talk about each one in detail. I call it the power plant model because it forms a framework on how you learn and practice your internal arts. Right? Now, to give you a background of the analogy, let's say you want to bring electricity to a country or a place that does not have electricity. You have to do a few things. First, you got to build a power plant, right? That will generate the electricity. And secondly, you've got to build the transmission lines to transmit that power from the power plant to where it's needed, because the power plant may be located far from town and so on. Right? So you've got to have the transmission lines. And thirdly, once the electricity reached the town or the house or the factory, the premise must have the appliances or the tools to make use of electricity, right? So it's no point bringing electricity to a home that doesn't even have a light bulb, right? But if the home has all these electrical appliances or a factory has all the tools and the machinery, then you can make use of the electricity, okay? So to electrify a country, a state, then you need these 3 things. You need a power plant, you need the transmission system, and you need to have the tools and the appliances that actually make use of the energy. Now, this analogy ties very nicely to what you're doing when you're learning internal arts, okay? The first part is you must learn how to generate the energy, right? But once you generated the energy, be it Qing, Qi, or Yi, whatever, you have to be able to transmit the energy to where you want it to do the work, right? So most people thought of the Dantian as a source of energy. That is partially true, okay? But let's say you have generated energy in the Dantian. How do you get it from the dantian to your hands? How do you establish the transmission lines? Is there a technique or practice to do that, you see, right? So the second part is, once you learn how to generate energy, you must learn how to channel the energy within your own body, let's say, right? So that is the next part. So again, does your practice or does your Qigong or art or Nei Gong have a technique or practice for building the transmission system, right? Yes, it has most Qigong practices, as far as I know, has the techniques or practice of generating energy. But what I find lacking is a lot of systems don't talk about how you transmit that energy. And then thirdly, once the energy, let's say, reach your hands, I'm a martial artist or I'm a healer, I need to use my hands. So what are the tools and appliances do I have at my disposal? Again, I find that many Qigong, Nei Gong or martial arts do not talk about this, you see. What do you do with your hands once you have the energy there, right? So these are the three components, you see. So to have a complete system, again, you need these three components. You don't just generate energy, but there's nowhere to go, right? Or if you have the energy there, you don't know what to do with it, you know? So all these are interrelated again. That's why the power plant model is so important. It allows you to ask the questions, right, of your own practice. Say, okay, I can generate energy. How do I get it to go from here to here or here to my feet, right? Or once I got it to my hands, what do I do with it, you know? So these will be questions that help to guide you in your learning process. Okay, that's why I find that this power plant model is important, right? Because it helps you to ask the right questions so that you can gain a deeper understanding of your own practice. The learning triangle is basically three parts, right? We put in the form of triangle. And the three parts are theory, technique, and practice, okay? So in any Nei Gong system, you must have all these three components, you see, because you take away any one of them, right? The system will fall apart, you see. So you don't have a complete system. And you don't have a complete system, then you cannot achieve the goals in your practice of Nei Gong, okay? So, okay, let me explain. Theory is basically the theory behind your system, okay? In the case of our Shaolin foundation, you know, you talk about Jing, you talk about the I Jing Jing, right? The changing of tendons, the Xi Sui Jing, you know, the washing of bone marrow. So these forms the theory. Of course, they need not be so elaborate. They could be simpler theories, but essentially you need to have a set of foundation theories, you see. Because without this, there's nothing, you know, for your system to build on, you see. So you need a set of theories. Now, secondly, you have techniques. So the techniques are the physical manifestation of the theories. The theories are pure concepts, they are ideas, right? They exist in your mind. But because we are talking of the physical realm, right? We are talking about martial arts, we are talking about movement and health. These theories must have a physical manifestation, right? So if you talk about, say, okay, bringing, let's say using Jing or bringing Jing up from the ground. So how do you do it? What is the technique for that? What is the posture you use for that, right? So that becomes the technique, you see. What do you do, right? So therefore, the technique actually reflects the theory, you see. So if your theory cannot be manifested physically, then the theory is superfluous. It's just an idea. It cannot be manifested, right? So sometimes you have Qigong, I don't want to mention names, but they have fantastic theory. But when it comes to technique, they either cannot demonstrate, they cannot show, or the techniques does not exist, you see. So technique allows you to show, you know, the concepts in a physical form. Okay, let's say, okay, I bring my Jing to my fingers and I push you. Right, then actually do that, you see, right? But you cannot do that. Then all you have is just a theory, you know. You have no technique, there's no physical way to manifest your technique, right? So after you have the technique, just knowing it doesn't make you better, right? You may know all the theories and all the technique in the world, but if you do not practice, you're not going to go anywhere. And that is as simple as that, you know. So in a lot of the traditional arts, and I don't mean just martial arts, be it meditation, spiritual arts, even things like calligraphy and painting. All this is dependent on practice, you see, because practice is what integrates the body and the mind. It's through the movement of practice, in the case of martial arts, right, by moving the body, by focusing your yi or your concentration, that you begin to integrate the body and the mind, and then you wire these techniques into your mental state, as what they say in modern neuroscience, you're building the pathways and synapses, right, that capture the knowledge and the intelligence of what you're trying to do into the mind, you see. Okay, so without practice, this doesn't happen, right? You can just talk about it, but you will not be able to do it, okay? So that's why the triangle is important, because if your system does not have all these three, a theory, a technique, and a system of practice, then that system will not give you results. It's as simple as that. So when evaluating or choosing a particular art, Qi Gong, Nei Gong, whatever it is, they must have all three components, and each of the components must be interrelated. That means that you have a technique but does not have a theory behind it, then what's the point doing that technique, right? And you have a technique but you have no way to practice it, that's also not the point. Then that technique is not realizable, right? So all these are interrelated, okay? So one way to evaluate a system is, okay, do they have a good theory? Do they have a sound theory? Do they have a sound manifestation of that theory into techniques? And do they have a well-defined way of practicing and developing those techniques, right? If you don't, then I would say that your chances of achieving any goal is, pretty limited. Now let's go back to an old story. Now normally when you all ask a traditional master of internal arts, right, how do you go about learning the internal arts? And the usual answer, and you will find this, it's sort of quite common, right, is they will tell you, oh, first you use the outside to move the insides. And then later, you use the insides to move the outside, right? So these two statements, using the outside to move the inside and using the inside to move the outside, is often repeated. But what does it mean? Number one, right? And number two, what I feel is they fail to tell you that there's three other steps in between. So when you use the outside to move the inside and the inside to move the outside, there are actually three other steps in between, you see. So which they fail to inform you. So what is that's why I call it the 5 stages. So the first stage is actually true. Use the outside to move the inside, right? Then secondly, once you can get the inside to move, you try to be more aware or mindful. This is where your mindfulness comes in, you see. You try to be mindful of what is happening inside your body, okay? Then thirdly, once you become mindful and aware of it, you learn how to control it, okay? So now you learn how to control it with your mind as well as your physical movement. So you can do it whenever you want and not have to do it a few times to get it, sort of thing, right? So you're wiring in your mental circuits, your neuromuscular connections, so to speak, right? And once you learn how to control it, then you use those internal parts to generate energy and learn how to generate energy. And the last part is you learn how to channel that energy. So once you already channel it, then that goes to the transmission part, how you channel the energy, and also how to use it, right? Whether you use it, your hands, a finger, a thrust, a chop, whatever, right? So those are the 5 parts. So that's the last part actually is when you know how to transmit energy, this is where the insides move the outside, right? So you have those 3 other parts in between. Now let me go a bit into each of those parts. Now, in a lot of the traditional Nei Gong arts, right, the movements are very important because the movements have to be done precisely. Because when you do these movements precisely, it is what is moving the inside, you see. So you're using your muscular or your physical movement to then move the fascia, the tendons, inside the body, okay? And So that's why when you do this, you have to go to the second part. Once you get the movements right. So the first part is learning how to do the movements correctly with precision. So when you learn the movements, it's got to be run with precision. That means that if you're supposed to do this and this vertical, it has to be vertical. You cannot do this or you cannot do this, you know. So it's there, it means it's there and it's there for a purpose. So once you can do the movements correctly and you don't have to think so much about it, then you turn your attention inwards. You learn to put your awareness to feel what is going on in your body as you do the moves. Then you can say, I feel this part move, or I feel that part move. I feel the warmth rising in my belly, you know, whatever, right? There may be different interpretations depending on the system you do, but that is the awareness part. You need to be aware of what is happening inside, okay? Another way to describe it is, of course, the modern buzzword is being mindful, you see? So you're learning to be mindful of your body, okay? And of course, that relates to the mental training part as well, but let's not go there first. So by being mindful about it, you pay attention to your body, you know what's going on, and you learn to have deeper insights of how your body works, how the fascia functions, where your, you know, your internal parts are, right? And when I mention internal parts, I think we mentioned this before. We talk about, we have this metaphorical structure we call the strings, right? Which is a connection between your fascia, your muscles, and your tendons that create these channels within the body for the transmission of energy and power, so to speak. So you want to be aware of that. You want to learn where your strings are, how they are connected. And then from there, you go to the third part where you learn how to control it. So when you learn how to control it at will with your mind and maybe with a bit of the body action, then you learn how to generate energy with it, you see. So through the internal structures. And once you have that, the internal structures are also the medium by which you transmit that energy. So that's why learning to know about the internal structures is very important, you see? And that comes from the second part, the awareness, and the third part, the control part of it, all right? So once you can control, then you can use it to generate energy. And there are, again, different mechanisms for doing that, depending on the type of art that you do. And once you can generate the energy, then you learn how to transmit it and use it, right? At your hands, at your feet, wherever, okay? Or throughout your whole body. So those are the 5 stages that you need to go through, right? So you cannot just say, go from 1 to 5. No, you have to go through them step by step, you see. And coming back to this, I want to pay particular attention to part 2 or stage 2 is where you turn your awareness inside into your own body. And that is precisely what we mean by E, right? E or intention or focus. You learn to develop that focus by turning your attention and awareness within your own body. And then learning to have the insights and the better understanding of how those internal parts work, right? So that's why stage 2 is where you start developing your E, and then leads to the control, which is also using the E, the intention. And then finally, you learn how to generate energy and transmit it, all right? So this covers that 5-stage process of learning internals. Now, what I'd like to sum up by saying that 1, 2, and 3, the learning triangle, the power plant model, and the 5-stage process of learning internals is generic. It should apply to all of the internal arts, okay? So in a way, you can say any internal art that does not have these 3 components means that it is incomplete, right? And in a way, you can also use these 3 models, rather I call it models, to evaluate whether the art that you're learning or the art that you intend to learn is actually authentic or not. Because if it's authentic, it should have all these 3 components. So you can use this as a template, so to speak, you know, to sort of measure the art, whether it is complete or not. Because if it's not complete, then I'm sad to say, then you'll be wasting a lot of time and getting very little result. And worse is, I've known people who have spent a lot of money. So they've not only wasted years, they have wasted tens of thousands of dollars learning something that gave them hardly any result, right? So this is something to be aware of. And using these 3 models in the roadmap, it will help you to evaluate the type of art that you're learning. Okay, this is a teaching that I got from my father, Grandmaster Yap Cheng Hai, and it is a Shaolin theory about learning internals, and this defines the 6 levels of internal energy very clearly and how they are interdependent on each other. Okay, so the 6 levels are, firstly, I'll use the Mandarin terminology, Li, which means strength, literally means physical strength. Okay. Secondly is Jing, which is I term as elastic or kinetic energy. Thirdly is Yi, which is intention or focus or will. And then fourth, then only comes Qi. Okay, so Qi, as you notice, is number 4 along the line, right? And Qi, you can roughly say in terms of Chinese philosophy and traditional medicine, is life force. Okay, it's your life energy, and that exists both in the humans, in living beings, on the earth, the environment, and so on, right? Later we'll talk more a bit about Qi. And then the 5th one is what we call Shen. Shen literally translates to spirit, but this is not an extra spiritual entity, but it's your own spirit. Okay, that refers to your spirit, your fighting spirit, your courage, your determination. That sort of spirit. Okay, your own spirit. And then lastly is Shi. Shi is normally associated with the word Kong Shi, right? That means emptiness, right? Yeah. So Shi is emptiness. Okay. Now, okay, let me explain each one of these. Li is physical strength, right? And if you're doing martial arts, you need basic physical strength. You cannot jump, you cannot go into a low squat, you don't have the muscle power to enable you to move fast or complete a long and acrobatic form, then you can't do martial arts, you see. So Li is a very basic requirement, but you do not want to be stuck in Li, right? You want to be able to move to the next level, which is Jin, okay? So a lot of people make the mistake is, I lift weights, I build bigger muscles, then I become more powerful. That is precisely defeating the purpose, because your purpose is, once you achieve a basic level of Li, you want to be able to move into Jing and develop more power using your Jing. Okay, Jing is basically elastic energy. The best way to describe it is the sort of energy you get when you pull a bow and release, right? What propels the arrow is the kinetic energy that's stored by pulling the bow. Or you have a catapult, it's the same thing. You stretch the rubber band, you release it, and the pellet or the stone will fly, right? So what is that elastic medium that develops the Jing? So in our case, that is a combination of your muscles, your tendons, and your fascia. So that's why by learning how to control those 3 elements, and these 3 elements precisely are within your voluntary control, right? You can use your mind to move your muscles to tense certain part of your body. You see, it is within your voluntary control. So that's why it is at the basic lower level, because it's something that you can learn to control relatively easy. So if you can learn how to control this, generate the tension, and allow that release, and that is what allows you to generate the Jing. So that's why in a lot of internal arts, they always use this term song, be song, right? Be loose, be relaxed. And that is precisely that. When you pull a bow and you release, you just release it, right? You just release. You don't just, pull, sort of release the bow that way with your hands holding onto the bowstring, because that will definitely slow the arrow and the arrow will just drop, you see. So that's why when you learn Jing, you want to be song, so that when it comes to releasing the energy, you're totally loose, and that energy will just shoot out, you see. So that is the principle, okay? So that's Jing, and Jing is directly related to the use of your fascia, your tendons, and your muscles, okay? So that is Jing. And also it relates to how you connect up the different parts of your body. Basically, that's how you make it work together. Now, next comes Yi, okay? So Yi is essentially not an energy by itself. Rather, you can think of it as the way to control the energy. So that's why it's your intention, your mind, your will, your focus. So by using your Yi, your mental effort, It's how you then make certain parts of your body work and move the way that you want it, right? That's how you use that tense the parts of the body that allows you to generate the Qing, and it allows you to release all the muscles at the same time so that the Qing will just shoot out, you see. So that's why the E is important, okay? Although it by itself is not an energy, it controls the energy. It controls how you generate the energy. That's why E is a very important element there, okay? And yeah, I won't talk about other uses of E, but anyway, that is the importance of E right now. Then you have Qi. Now, think of Qi as another form of energy. Just as Qing is elastic energy, Qi is just another form of energy. Okay, one analogy I could use is compare a steam train and an electric train, right? Both serve the same function. Both can carry heavy loads and move at high speed, right? But on the one hand, one is driven by steam, one is driven by electricity. And the steam engine is very obvious and impressive. You have a lot of sound, you have steam, you have, sparks coming out of the fire, right? So there's a lot of external display of whatever, that gives the impression of force. Whereas in an electric train, when you hit the button and the thing accelerates, there is no other side effects, put it that way. You don't see lights blaring, you have no sound, you have no steam, you see, it just goes. So Qi is like that. It's a very subtle and yet a very powerful energy compared to, I would say, a steam engine is a lead and Qi is the electric train, okay? And both serve the same thing. If anything, the electric train can go faster than the steam train, right? And it's quieter, right? So it's just another form of energy. So this is electricity versus steam, for example. So Qi is just another form of energy. Now, Shen is harder to explain, right? Shen to me is your spirit, but how do you describe that spirit? I think to me the best way I would describe it is it has to do with the aura, right? I think all living creatures do put out a very small electromagnetic field that creates this aura around you, right? And that is measurable by scientific instruments. So Shen is to do with that projection of energy outwards from within your body. Of course, how far that is projected, I dare not say at the moment because my experience in that area is very limited. But to me, the training of the Shen is to sort of extend your energy outwards within the body. That basically is the big difference, right? Whereas the rest is all within your body, this is extending it outside the body, okay, the Shen. Now, when it comes to the Shi, the emptiness part, I would plead ignorance, okay? Because at this point in time, I am not at that level. I do not have the direct experience about emptiness. And I would hesitate to speculate about it. I don't want to speculate about it, okay? So there you have the 6 stages. Now, the important thing about this is to learn internal energies, you have to start at the basics level. You can't jump. You can't leapfrog, put it that way. So you have leap, then you learn Qing. Then once you have Qing, then you develop your Yi. Once you have Yi, then you develop your Qi, you see. So I think a lot of people face problem because they try to go straight into Qi, right? And as I mentioned, Qi is the 4th thing, But you haven't developed your Qing, you haven't developed your Yi, then it's going to be difficult. I'm not saying impossible, but it's going to be difficult to develop your Qi. So you may take 10 years to get to Qi. Whereas if you follow the proper pathway, you get there, like I say, in 1/3 the time, right? Whereas if you just work at a very high level, you may not. So the analogy I'll put on this is like a university professor, right? In any subject, let's say physics or literature, trying to teach a kindergarten kid, you see. Because the kindergarten kid has not got that experience and that knowledge within them. Whatever knowledge that the professor tries to impart on the child will just go over his head, right? He won't be able to understand. But if the kid has gone through, the basic education, then junior high, and then high school, and by the time he comes to university, then he is in a ready position for the professor to teach him, you see. So it is the same analogy, right? So that's why, to me, this 6 stages of energy is so important, because most people tend to be impatient and they want to leapfrog. But if you leapfrog, you're actually going to, I would say, waste a lot of time, right? It's better to stick to the roadmap, so to speak, and work on it on a progressive level. And when you do that, you can actually achieve your end goal faster than if you try to leapfrog it. So this is from my teaching and learning experience, okay, of more than 10 years. Okay, the milestones are a set of skills and capabilities that one would achieve if they are on this journey, right? So the first milestone, and I think this should apply to almost any type of Qigong or Nei Gong, internal art, right, is the ability to ground, right? So the ground means you can plant your feet, you have stability standing on the ground, so that you can resist, somebody's force on you, right? So the first skill you need to do is to ground. That means that you can sing. It's not, you can say the traditional metaphor is to sing your chi to the ground, right? But I'm saying it's even something more basic than that, right? You can find the stability by adjusting the structures in your body, right? Remember, we say the body is a tensegrity structure and you have all the different linkages. So to be able to ground means that you can actually connect those different parts such that when the force is transmitted here, it ends up there, you see, right? Because the tensegrity structure allows you to transmit the forces or distribute the forces in multiple directions. So by using your E, you're able to transmit those forces where you want it to go, which is in the ground. So in this case, grounding is the most primary milestone, right? If you learn Qigong and you've done about a few years of that and you can't even ground, then I think there's something missing there, right? Either in your practice or so on. The second thing is what we call rooting, okay? Now, most people confuse rooting and grounding, or they combine the two together. For us, there's a big difference. The difference between grounding and rooting is in rooting, you're able to really put your energy down to the ground, right? That means that your connection to the ground is established. So the energy can go down and up. Now, whether you believe in energy or not, well, I think if you practice internal arts, you do. Otherwise, why do you bother to even practice internal arts, right? So the rooting allows you to put your Jing into the ground or draw Jing from the ground, so to speak. Now, in many cases, it may not actually be directly pulling energy from the ground, but basically, you're using the rebound energy, right? When you push down on the ground, then you get the rebound energy going up and then redirecting the energy. So the ability to do that comes from rooting, you see. So if you don't have rooting, you cannot do that transfer of energy to and from the ground, so to speak, right? So that is the big difference between rooting and just grounding. Grounding is just basic stability. You can resist the force. But if the force is too great, you can't overcome it, your structure will topple. But with rooting, you can absorb the ground to a certain extent and put that energy to the ground. Therefore, you can resist much greater forces, right? And of course, to be able to do rooting, you have to achieve the ability to be song, right? That means to be loose and relaxed, okay? So that's rooting. Then thirdly comes what we call centering, right? Centering is important because centering essentially means that you can focus. You can think of it as like center of gravity, where the center of gravity acts as the point to which all the forces react, you see, right? So in centering, this is our center, the center line. Some will call it the spine, but it can also be slightly in from the spine, right? That means from the Bai Hui to the Hui Ning, your perineum, right? So anyway, that is the center. So it's about learning how to maintain that center, how to keep it still, although your body is moving, but your center is still, you see? So having the center relates to what they call stillness in motion and also motion in stillness, okay? Now, not only about keeping the center still, it also talks about how you maintain the center while you're moving, right? So that is all the functional centering. And what that boils down to is, you see, because if you're just rooted, you become rigid. And no matter how strong you are, if you're rigid, a stronger force will always overwhelm you. But you can center, you can yield to that force, you can either turn it to deflect it or you can sidestep it, but you can come back to your original position, you see. So you're not moved out of the space that you want to be, put it that way, right? So being able to center actually builds on the capability of rooting, because if you can't root, you can't center. See? So same thing goes. So each one of the milestones are dependent also, right? So if you don't have grounding, you can't have rooting. You don't have rooting, you can't have centering, right? Yeah. Then after centering is the ability to set a boundary, all right? And in this case, what that manifests itself is to be able to provide resistance or to block. In the case of strikes, it'll be the ability to counter and take the blows, or to block the blows, or in the case of pushing, to offer resistance to the pushing force or to return that pushing force. So you learn how to manage this boundary to your space, right? Using the skills based on your grounding, rooting, and centering. So then when it comes to this part here about maintaining your boundaries, then it talks about basic techniques already, how to block, how to push, how to strike, right? So all this comes in the picture. Then beyond that, there's at least another 3 or 4 more milestones, but I don't want to mention it right now because it will not make sense to many people, right? So at least you have the first 4 milestones, you see, which is grounding, rooting, centering, and maintaining boundaries, right? Yeah. Okay, so this sums up what the roadmap is, those 5 points. Okay, so although I say that the first 3 are generic, right? Any Qigong that you talk about should have these 3, because if you don't have these 3, I feel that they are not complete. And you're not complete, then your learning process will be impacted. And then the other 2, the 4th one is more specific for our Shaolin teaching methods of internals, because I think the Wu Tang, Tai Chi and all that, they have their own theory. It's okay, but as far as we are concerned, this is our guiding principle, the 6 levels of internal energy. And then the last one, the milestones, I think some of it is generic, right? Because grounding and rooting is generic. No matter what Qigong you do or what internal arts you do, if you don't have grounding and rooting, I don't think you're doing internal arts, right? And then, of course, the centering is also part of that, right? Then about the setting of boundaries, then depends on what art you're doing, But at least the first 3 milestones should be common to any art. Okay, so you can say the milestones also serve to not only evaluate yourself, but to evaluate the people who are practicing, who will teach you the art. Does he have these principles? Can he clearly demonstrate it to you? Okay. One thing more that I like to talk about is landmarks. Right? I mentioned landmarks, and exactly what I mean by landmarks. Landmarks is your own personal experiential learning. Okay. Now, when a teacher talks about rooting, he should be able to demonstrate rooting to you, either by allowing you to push him or by fine-tuning and teaching you the technique so that you can root. And when he pushes you, you can feel that you are rooted, you see. So that experience about learning how to root is what I call a landmark. No, when as an instructor, if I teach you that in the beginning, and you experience it, fine, that's good. But I don't expect you to have that skill one-off. Nobody can learn that quick, right? Just one lesson and you develop that skill, you see. But the important thing is I can let you feel what it's like to be rooted. Either you can feel how I'm rooted, because as an instructor, I can demonstrate that skill to you. Or if you're at a certain, at a certain level of learning already, you practice enough, I can actually fine-tune you, right? And show you how you can root and push you to let you feel that feeling, get that feeling of rooting, you see. And once you feel it, that will always stick in your mind. That becomes a landmark. So even after this lesson, you may not be able to do it, or you may not be able to do it consistently. That's fine. But at least you have it in your mind and you know that is what you need to aim for. See? So if you have nothing to aim for, then it becomes an imaginary target. You only imagine, oh, I'm rooted, but you're not. Okay, and I've seen that in many Qigong practitioners. They think they're rooted, but you just put one finger on their chest and they're already off balance. But they think they are rooted. So that means they don't have a landmark. You see? Their landmark is purely imaginary. But if you actually experience what rooting is, right, And then that would serve as a micro goal, a micro objective that you can aim for in your training. You see? So that's why landmarks are important. Yeah. And having said that, it's part of a good teacher's role to be able to set the landmarks for their student, you see, by actually letting them experience it or feel it either on the teacher or on the student, right? And hence a teacher must not only be able to talk about the theory, they must be able to demonstrate exactly, what is in the theory. You see, if you can't demonstrate that, then talking about it is pointless, you see, and it doesn't help in the learning process. And I think that's the point I want to make, and that's why landmarks are important, is that actual experience.
As you probably guessed, the online course that Master Yap will be releasing on my website will be on the Yan Shou Gong. Now, for those of you that are looking to get into internal martial arts and you're looking for both comprehensive and authentic teachings, then the Yan Shou Gong course is definitely going to be for you. Master Yap will give comprehensive instructions on all 36 sets of the Yan Shou Gong. So if you haven't already, please go to my website, themartialman.com, create a free account, and you will be notified the moment that that course is released. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.
themartialman.com